to introduce my two colleagues. First is my friend Joe Hawley. He's been with the bank, obviously, for several years, as has Beth. They are both talented financial advisors. They really do have their arms around this content very strongly. We reached out to them specifically to help us out today. Also very kind and very approachable folks. So I don't want you to feel intimidated. Hold on to your questions until we get to the end, but jot down some questions because everybody knows this is a pretty deep content area. So please don't hesitate to ask. If you're thinking it, somebody else is thinking it too, okay? Obviously, you know who we are, Cape Cod 5 with 26 locations on the Cape, the islands, and southeastern Massachusetts. And just to give you an idea of the agenda that we have here today, we're going to work our way through the legal documents, the various advisors you want to think about, just starting to verify and organize what you have in getting things into some sort of order, just in case somebody needs to be able to get that information for you in case you're in trouble. And then obviously we'll finish up with some Q&A as well. So with that, I'd like to introduce my colleague, Joe Hawley.
Hello, everyone. It's great to be here in cyberspace with you. I'm kind of hoping we'd be done with this at some point, but it goes on, right? Anyways, thank you very much for dialing in. We certainly appreciate this opportunity to pass along some of what we've learned, Beth and I, over the years in our role in banking and specifically the trust and asset management area of Cape Cod 5. We are going to offer several things we recommend that you do to get your financial affairs in order, and then several things that we would like you to consider doing. And we'll differentiate between those two as we go along. But the big question is, why is this important? I think you've already figured that out because that you're on the call. But we really hope to give you some inspiration to get yourself organized, and because it really is important as you age up. And we're going to give you several examples of what happens if you're not organized. But the other thing we'd like to do is help you uncover areas that might need your immediate attention and action. And I suspect that we all can find things on all these various topics we're going to cover. And with the end result of giving you some peace of mind about how your financial life is organized, and to make things much easier for the most important people in your life in case life throws you some serious curveballs. And I'm talking about your family. And so planning ahead and being organized really will be something, a bit of a legacy you can leave your family as things move on. So we're going to start with our first topic, and this includes a lot of must-do items. And Beth Thompson is going to cover this area. Beth.
Great. Thanks, Joe.
Yep.
So I'm going to go over some legal documents that you should have and why you should have them. And just to be clear, I just want to make sure that you understand we're not trying to give you legal advice. We're just trying to get you informed so that you can reach out to your legal person, your attorney, to get things organized in your life. So this is an interesting screen. 3 people who are completely different. We have Heath Ledger, who was the Joker. We have John Wayne, and we have Ted Williams. So the question is, what do they have in common? Why are we showing this to you? And the answer really is because they all died, unfortunately, earlier than they should have, but they all died without an updated estate plan. So I'm going to talk about what that meant to them and their families. So we'll start with Heath Ledger. So he was very young when he started earning money, and he was unmarried. He decided that he needed to write a will. And at that time, he put in his sisters and his parents as beneficiaries of his will, of all of his assets. So he didn't, years went by, he got engaged, he had a baby. Unfortunately, he died unexpectedly, but he never changed his will. So his daughter and his fiance were not going to receive anything according to the state laws and the will. So fortunately, his parents and his family knew that that was wrong, and everything went to his daughter. So they were able to avoid court and avoid the headaches that would come from that. But just as a note to say, you know, when you have a life change, you really need to go back to your documents and put that in, because the court doesn't care. It looks at the will and says, this is who it's going to, and that's it. So the next one is John Wayne. Interesting fact, he is actually still one of the highest earners, even after his passing. So his estate is still making money. But he had a very, very simple will, but he had a very complicated family. He had multiple marriages. He had 7 children. So when he passed, nobody agreed with how his assets should be distributed. The children fought, the parents, the ex-wives fought. One of them wasn't even named in his will. He left money to secretaries. So it was a really tumultuous passing. So they spent years and years in court and hundreds of thousands of dollars to figure out who was going to get what and how it was going to be divided. And then Ted Williams, I'm sure you've all heard about this one. It's kind of an interesting one. So there was a huge legal battle after he passed because his will stated that he was to be buried in Florida. But 2 of his children produced a piece of paper that he had signed saying that he actually wanted to be cryogenically frozen. So there was a very long and costly legal battle for years. And finally, the court ruled that that piece of paper was signed by Ted Williams, and he is now cryogenically frozen in Arizona, where he still remains there. So the bottom line is that planning ahead is crucial to avoid the costs and the time and the family conflict. So if you're not updating your legal documents, it leaves a lot left on the table and that people might disagree about. So if you go to the next slide, Jim, the first legal document we'll talk about is your will. So a will is a legal document that designates what happens to your property after you die. But it also, in your will, you can name a guardian for your minor children. And you also name a personal representative. And the personal representative is the person that you delegate to distribute your property as you want it to. So it used to be called an executor, but they've changed it now to personal representatives. So without a will, this is crucial. Without a will, every state has intestate laws that dictate how your estate is distributed, and it may not be the way you want it to be distributed. So for an example, I recently looked at the Mass intestate laws, and if you are married but have no children and your parents are alive, your parents get part of your funds if you have no will. So that might not be what you want. You might want your spouse to receive everything. But if you don't have a will, that's probably not going to happen. So with your will, I'm sorry if I'm going too fast. Please stop me if I'm talking too fast. I tend to do that. So with your will, you want to keep it in a secure place, safe deposit box. Your attorney should have a copy, and the person you've named as your personal representative should also have a copy. It needs to be witnessed in Massachusetts by 2 witnesses, and they need to sign the document. And again, you want to make sure you update it as you have life changes. So if you get divorced, if you start to have children, or if you have another child, or if you have grandchildren and you want to name them in your will, you want to update it as those things happen. So the next document is the durable power of attorney. Thank you, Jim. So this delegates authority to an individual to act while you are alive on your behalf. So if you are incapacitated, if you're in the hospital having surgery, if you start having dementia and a doctor declares you incompetent, while you're alive, you can name somebody, you can delegate your financial, basically your financial and legal authority to somebody else. And it's crucial to have this, because if you get in a car accident, you have to think about things that would need to normally keep going on while you're in the hospital that you can't take care of. Somebody needs to pay your bills, pay your mortgage, pay your utilities, take care of your financial affairs. So again, this is only good while you're alive. So once you pass, I'm sorry, very dark subject, but once you pass, it no longer, that person no longer has authority. So just something to keep in mind. And then the healthcare proxy, it's similar to the durable power of attorney, where you are delegating authority to somebody else to make medical decisions for you. Again, in the event that you're incapacitated and can't sign the papers at the hospital, this person can do that for you. But the only thing I want to mention about this is that, one, you really do have to trust this person. You want to make sure it's somebody close to you. You want to make sure they have a copy of the healthcare proxy. And you also want to let them know what you want. What do you want to have happen to you if you go into the hospital? So that brings us to our next document, and that's the medical directive. It's also known as a living will. So in this document, you write down what your wishes are in case you are unable to speak for yourself. So if you're in the hospital and something bad has happened, your healthcare proxy can look at this document and say whether or not you want to be put on life support, a feeding tube. Do you want to be resuscitated? And it's awful things to think about. But if you don't write it down, or if you haven't had that conversation with your healthcare proxy, they're going to do what they want to do. And that may not be what you want. So as morbid as it is, it's important to write it down. And I think, Joe, you might actually have a story about this.
I've got one on this, and Jim, if you could just back up, because I've got a quick one on the healthcare proxy. So I've got two family stories, unfortunately. But on the proxy, had a relative here. I have a relative here on the Cape that's lived on the Cape for about 3 or 4 years, and actually went into Cape Cod Hospital in a pretty serious situation. And we found a copy of his healthcare proxy. It was dated 10 years ago, and he had moved down to Cape from upstate New York, and actually he'd named his primary healthcare physician as the only proxy. So fortunately, he had a very quick recovery. Things didn't go, south, so to speak. But it was just a prime example of why you should look at these documents every couple of years, because we would have been, in pretty deep distress if he hadn't recovered so quickly. So first thing we did was we went in the hospital. I got a new form, and so we've got some folks here, my wife and myself, as the proxies for him now. So he's all set. If you could just flip over, Jim, to the next one. This story is pretty sad. It had to do with my mother, and this is going back almost 20 years. But she did not have a medical directive. She was off Cape, and had told the kids, and you probably have all heard this and do this with your own kids. Hey, I don't want to be hooked up to machines and so on if I end up in a coma or something. Everyone has heard this. And she didn't have a medical directive. Her second husband had the proxy. The kids all knew what she wanted. She was basically in a coma, and so the net result was there was a lot of disagreement, hard feelings within the family about what happened, because she ended up on a feeding tube for another couple of years, which was pretty sad ending. But anyways, there are a lot of examples of why you need these documents, and please, if you have them, if you don't have them, get them. If you do have them, please make sure you take a look at them every couple of years. Back to you, Beth.
Thanks, Joe. So the last legal document that I'll talk about is trust, so irrevocable or revocable. So having a trust may help minimize your estate tax. It definitely helps you avoid probate. So anytime you can avoid having the court involved in settling your estate, that is a bonus. The probate court has made it much easier these days because they have streamlined things, but it still can be costly and it can still take some time. So putting your assets into the name of a trust can help avoid probate. Another thing that trust can help with is if you have a special needs child, you can leave assets to them in a trust so that their benefits as they age are not troubled. The trust is not their asset. It's you leaving it to them in a special needs trust, which helps them continue their benefits and not affect any of their benefits. So the other benefit of having your assets in the name of a trust, especially when you're alive, is that in a trust document, it's a document that your lawyer will write out for you, you name a successor trustee. So let's say you have all your accounts in the name of your trust and something happens to you and you're in the hospital, like we've talked about, your successor trustee can come in and step up for you and continue to pay your bills and continue to take care of you, pay your medical bills while you're incapacitated. So next, Joe is going to cover our thoughts on putting together a professional team of advisors.
One of the things that I learned early in my banking career was the generic advice to clients of the institution to put together a team of advisors. And if you've done this, you'll understand what I'm talking about. But it really is, everyone needs help with different things in their life. And it's always good to have a circle of friends, circle of family to help you. And when it comes to your financial affairs and legal issues surrounding your financial affairs, it's really very wise advice to give to all of you to put together a team of specialists. So starting with, as Beth has been talking about, in terms of putting these documents together, a reputable, experienced estate planning attorney is really kind of the first thing that we would recommend. There are hundreds and hundreds of attorneys throughout the Cape, and most of them, the vast majority, are what I would call generalists. They do, maybe a lot of real estate. They maybe do a lot of business and corporate law, and family law as well. But we recommend, and maybe they do a little bit of estate planning, but we would highly recommend that you go to someone that specializes in estate law. That's where you'll have the best results. And if you don't know of one and would like to get a referral or some names, you could reach out to either Beth or myself. We'd be happy to give you some names. And luckily here on the Cape, as with many things, there are some really good attorneys almost in every town on the Cape. So it's pretty easy referral to make. But so that's our first piece of advice there. Same is also true with accountants. I mean, if you're doing your own taxes and you're comfortable doing it, good, great. Keep doing that. But looking down the road, you might, as you age up, you might consider, having an accountant on your team of specialists. This is something, I did years ago. I'm really glad I did it. I guess that was somebody agreeing with me. So having an accountant, you can get a lot of advice along the way, as well as getting your tax returns prepared properly, and it just takes a worry off your shoulders. So I think that's a good person to have. Jim, if you go to the next slide, please. So, as you may have 401ks or investment accounts or inherited money, but it's a lot of folks are very comfortable managing their own investments and dealing with that. But if you're not, or if you're just entering retirement, you might consider speaking with someone that has that expertise. And it is something that, I think would be something you should consider. It's not a must-do. It's just something to think about. But if you were looking for someone to help you with your investments and such, the main attributes you want to look for would be trustworthiness, experience, and appropriate credentials. Questions to ask of someone that you might speak with is, what are the services they offer? What's their accessibility? Do they work, solo on a solo basis, or is there a team? What are the fees? You can even ask for references. Any reputable firm or brokerage firm would give you referrals, references. So that's another potential team member for you. Also, a good insurance agent. I'm sure you all have insurance, but you can use your insurance agent for advice for things like, what level of coverage do I need for life insurance? Do I need backup insurance for in case I get in a car accident? Things like that. I think a lot of folks don't think too much about it. They just want to get it done and move on. But I think the level of coverages should sort of line up with your financial situation. You always want to make sure that you protect yourself for any catastrophic type of event that starts with your house and your life. So also a good thing to have, and keep in mind who the beneficiaries say on your life insurance. A lot of folks, when they get divorced and so on, they forget about changing those beneficiaries, and that can lead to some family problems down the road. So the next subject is when to use friends and family. Pros and cons of naming family or friends in your legal documents. So here's kind of a quick overview of our thoughts. So for power of attorney, healthcare proxy, medical directives, we think it's ideal to name mature and trusted family members. And we get this question of is it okay to name a neighbor or friend? You can do that, but it can very easily put them in a very awkward position, particularly if you have other family members. We see this a lot. So it's really, I think it's best to figure out who the most mature and trusted family member is and kind of start there. Professionals such as attorneys and bankers and accountants, they will almost always decline to be named in a power of attorney, healthcare proxy, or medical directive. So you're going to need to start with your family first on that one. Next slide, please, Jim. So as a personal representative or someone that's going to be responsible for settling your estate, you could also use a family member. Some people would pick a friend, and I had an example of a college roommate called me up a couple of years ago and asked if I would be his personal representative. And, I was very honored to be asked to do that. But the reality is he lives in Colorado, and he's got some, a couple of kids that I don't really know all that well. And it just seemed like the distance and, the family situation was probably not a situation I wanted to end up in. So I strongly advise him to find a professional, either a good law firm that handles estates or a bank trust department. And I think that was probably pretty good advice for him. So, another reason to have a professional involved, a bank or an attorney, is they have the appropriate insurance levels to protect, their actions. As Beth alluded to, sometimes these estates can get messy pretty quickly. One thing that we do see a lot, and I think you might want to consider, is dual naming a professional that's got the expertise and experience, plus a family member who really understands the family dynamics. Quite often, this combination works really well. And all the legal processes are followed by the attorney as part of that team, while the other party, the family member, can kind of manage the family dynamics at the same time. Okay, so a little bit more on this. Okay, no, I guess we're done with that. So we're going to move on to the next topic. Beth is going to talk about verifying beneficiaries, account co-owners, and other considerations. Beth?
Thank you, Joe. So verifying beneficiaries. Why is this important? So let's look at the different types of accounts and see what would happen if you didn't have a named beneficiary. So for your IRA, let's say you rolled over 401ks, you now have IRAs set up, and if you don't have a beneficiary listed on that, the IRS rules say that the IRA will be payable to your estate, which you wouldn't think is a big deal, but an IRA is a tax deferred entity. So by making it payable to your estate, it automatically becomes taxable, first of all. So your estate is paying taxes, and it also has to be paid out within 5 years. So whoever the beneficiaries of your estate are going to have to take those funds from the IRA. So for your pension, a lot of times pensions are, when you start taking them, you have choices to make. You can make it single payer, survivorship, and maybe lump sum, but consider doing the survivorship so that when you pass on, your spouse then, or somebody else, one of your kids, can then start collecting your pension. So it's something to consider. Life insurance, I'm going to go back to what Joe Hawley said about life insurance. You want to make sure your beneficiaries are current, because believe it or not, I've seen this where a gentleman got divorced. A few years later, he remarried, and he never took off his ex-spouse from his life insurance policy. And the life insurance policy didn't care. The company didn't care. That was who was named. That was who got the life insurance proceeds, and not his current wife. So it's really important to make sure that you not only make sure you have a beneficiary listed, but you have a current beneficiary listed. So whether it's a spouse or your kids, it's really important. So for your bank accounts and your investment accounts, you want to think about having co-owners. And part of the reason, this is, again, a little bit morbid, but if you're the only person on your account, it's just in your name, checking account or investment account, what's going to happen when you pass away? The issue is it takes some time for your personal representative to get the proper paperwork in order to start paying your bills, paying your funeral costs. It doesn't happen overnight. So if you are the only person on your account, nobody has access to that. So your mortgage payment, your utilities, things like that will go unpaid. And maybe companies will be understanding because it's a life event, it's a huge life event. But the lack of liquidity is really a major issue that we see when we're settling estates. So it's really important to have that other person, or even, having it payable upon death to somebody else. So it's in just your name, payable upon death. So when you pass away, that person can go into the bank with a death certificate and have the account, have access to the account. So just something to think about. Also, having a co-owner keeps it out of probate, which is nice. So safe deposit box. A lot of times people open up a safe deposit box and put their legal documents in there, which is great. That we actually advise that. But if you're the only one in the box, nobody has access to your legal documents, meaning your will. So your personal representative will have to go to the court and get special permission to have your box drilled so that they can get in and get the will. Now, before, a few slides back, we mentioned your attorney should have a copy, your personal representative should have a copy. So those things will help, but it is important if you have jewelry in your safe deposit box. If you're the only signer on that, nobody's going to be able to have access to it for some time, which can cause a problem. So the next slide, I'm just going to talk about some considerations so that as you start to get organized, what are some things that might help you get organized? So the first one is consolidating investment accounts, IRAs and bank accounts. A lot of times you maybe have worked for different entities, different towns, different companies, and you've had 401ks or pensions or defined benefit plans, and then you go to another job. So you find that when you retire, you have 401ks or other retirement accounts kind of spread out. It can be very complicated. So it's important to think about putting those all in, it doesn't have to be one place, but consolidating them. Same with bank accounts. A lot of times people will get a mortgage at a bank and they say, oh, if you open up a checking and have it auto deduct, you'll get, the interest rate will be lower or the closing costs will be lower. So you do that. And then the next thing you know, you have 5 checking accounts around. And Joe and I see as people age up, that gets complicated and confusing. So our recommendation is to consolidate as much as you can. The next one, you guys, nobody might be old enough to know when there were stock certificates, but when you bought stock in a company, they would send you an actual certificate, which was your the right of ownership. They don't do that anymore, so they make it's all book entry. So yeah, we recommend that if you do have any, and believe me, we've settled estates where we've gone into people's homes after they've passed and found all of these stock certificates. If you happen to have any laying around, probably a good idea to go see a broker and change it to book entry. So another long time thing is savings bonds. So I don't know if you guys remember, but I know my father had his paycheck, every paycheck he bought savings bonds. So when he had a stack of savings bonds like this big. So a couple things on that is there are other investments that could earn you a higher percentage. Right now, savings bonds are paying, I think, 0.10%, which is pretty low. And the other thing that you may not know is that savings bonds stop earning interest after 30 years. So if you've had those ones that you bought from your paycheck, go into the safe deposit box, get them out, and convert them to something that can earn you more. The next item is, again, morbid, but it's kind of what we're talking about here. Preparing a letter of instruction about your funeral arrangements. So the last thing your family wants to do if something, God forbid, happens to you is to have to figure out the funeral arrangements. So if you have things that you want or don't want, write them down and let somebody know where that is. Because like I said, the last thing they want to do is make those decisions on your behalf. So it could be, hopefully for everybody, it's going to be years from now, but it's still a good idea to write it down and let somebody know where that is. And then the last thing I'll say is preparing a letter of your specific items to set aside for family or friends. So if you have a particular piece of jewelry or furniture that somebody has interest in, like your daughter-in-law has always complimented you on this piece of jewelry and you want to make sure she gets it, you do need to write that down. It doesn't need to be in your will, because your will basically will just say tangible personal property to my spouse or to my kids, but it doesn't specify it. So if you really want something to go to somebody specific, write it down, because otherwise they could battle about that. And the last thing, the whole point of all of this is to help your family. This whole slide is to help your family going forward, because when you're gone, you can't tell them what you want. So tell them now so that they have a place to look for that. Let's see. So I think we're going back. Joe, you're going to talk about some organizational to-do list.
So before I do that, Deanna, can you or Jim, how are we doing on time? I know it's getting close to the top of the hour here.
Sorry.
It's 5:54. So I asked people to allot for about an hour.
Okay. So we got
we want to be able to have a couple questions in there in the meantime.
So I'll kind of go through this last part rapidly here. But as we were doing research on this whole subject of getting organized, boy, every article I read, and I read a lot of them, just strongly suggested making lists. And isn't that fun? That sounds like a fun thing to do in the hot weather. But in terms of getting yourself prepared for the unexpected, and really to give yourself some peace of mind. And just as a practical exercise, at some point, I just want you to consider doing some of these things. List all the items in your home. And, when it comes time to doing things like insurance coverage, that's a good, that's one of the things that insurance agent's going to ask you about. If you take a look at getting consolidating accounts, just take a look at how many investment accounts or 401ks, IRAs you have. We see this all the time. People come in 4, 5, 6 of them, and they have no idea. They're not invested, in any kind of coordinated way. So it's something to look at. Beth talked about the bank accounts. Do you really need 4 checking accounts? I doubt it. Insurance is one. The credit cards. You want to have an idea of how many credit cards do you have? Do you need that many? And in terms of doing lists for the event of something really bad happening, that's also something that your personal representative might want to know. An interesting area that's kind of relatively new as a consideration, your digital life. We all have those sheets of paper stuffed everywhere with all our websites and passwords. And, an IT person sitting here would probably wrap my knuckles saying, hey, you're not supposed to write any of that down. But the reality, this is how most of us operate. And anything you can do to protect your password information, and even if you put a list of that, stuff it in your safe deposit box, and you had another signer on your safe deposit box, somebody can get to that on your behalf. And there might be a lot of great photos out there. I've heard of people, leaving their iTunes accounts to their kids. But there are some practical things you could do to protect your passwords. And there's these password keeper programs such as Keeper, Password Manager, Dashlane that work pretty well. So you only have to really remember one password, and then you can get into your whole list and keep that in the cloud. Another thing to think about is having a list of bills. I've done this that are paid online, because if I checked out tomorrow, I don't think my wife would know where to begin finding all that stuff. And these type of lists are good things to get to your personal representative, and obviously keep in a safe place. In terms of getting organized, go to the next slide, please, Jim. There's just these are just next several pages are just things that you want to have recorded somewhere, just in case. With my brother, with his emergency, I was asked all these questions about. Keep going, Jim, if you would, just kind of skip through these. What his blood type was, I had no idea. And at the moment, I didn't know exactly what documents he had. And then the medical data, who his doctor was, and emergency contacts and things like this. These are things that you really should have at hand. It's a good idea to have that. And particularly the last one, the medications. I mean, every time you go in for an appointment, I get asked about what's medications am I on, and I have to. So I've gotten in the habit of writing it down and just keep a little list in my briefcase, but for that use. But we do have a form, I think, that Jim can get to everyone, and maybe has already shared with Deanna, but just electronic, format of these data sheets that might help you get started in terms of organizing all this type of information. And sooner or later, trust me, someone's going to ask for it. You're going to need it. Your kids or somebody's going to need it. So while you're still on the right side of the green grass, let's get this done. And I think your family and your loved ones will definitely be very thankful if and when they have to use that. So the last slide here is really is just another strong suggestion to let your spouse know and your children who your professional team, of advisors are, and go the extra step of introducing them. Believe me, we love it when clients come in and introduce their kids. We like to meet the kids. We get a better feel for the whole family dynamic. and you're better able to serve our clients when we know that the next generation, and also know where your important information is located. And if you haven't got it organized, get it organized. And Beth talked enough about the funeral arrangements and all that. We'll try to kind of wrap on a high note. There are a lot of benefits to being organized. And I think the number one thing for yourself is just peace of mind. I know it's easy to kind of skip along through life, and I'll do this later, but later always comes eventually, unfortunately. And I think there are things you can do to get yourself organized, give yourself peace of mind, give your family, your loved ones, your spouse peace of mind. And with all that, we very much appreciate you letting us cover this somewhat dry topic, but hopefully you've all learned a little bit. And we're available right now to answer any questions. I see a hand raised right now.
Okay. I do. Could I just ask Jim, would you mind not